Right now, though, we're going to talk about the civil service and more bullying claims. Leon Emirali's here. Leon, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
Former government special advisor, former aide, of course, to the Right Honourable Steve Barclay MP, who's the latest minister to be accused of bullying. Funnily enough, in The Guardian. The Guardian has been leaked a load of information from the Department of Health and Social Care in which people supposedly have been privately referring to bullying and other bad behaviour. One source has told The Guardian, Barclay's style is very macho. He would say that it's forensic, but in reality he's a micromanager. He hauls people over the coals and is generally a bit unpleasant. I mean, I don't know what they expect from a government minister. I mean, it might have not escaped their notice that the Department of Health is in a pretty dire state and the entire NHS is kind of broken. So you might need somebody to be a bit robust about that.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't like someone, that doesn't mean that you can call them a bully.
Right.
If they're not walking around the office cracking jokes every 5 minutes, it doesn't mean you can call them a bully. And I think we have to understand that government is high pressure, stuff.
Right.
I mean, you're dealing with literally the NHS falling apart at the seams because everyone's on strike. You're dealing with all sorts of different issues that are literally a case of life and death in this instance. So the pressure and the stress of it does, build up. And I think that ultimately, if you've got someone who takes that on board and takes that to heart, is that a bad thing?
Right.
I mean, I think if you can be a tough taskmaster, I think that's what we want in government, rather than someone who's just going to pander to
and
every
also
whim.
it's kind of one of the rules of business, isn't it, that almost immediately that you order something to be done, particularly something to be changed, it almost certainly doesn't happen. And then when it doesn't happen, people tend to get a bit irritable. I mean, I remember working in newspapers and you'd be given an instruction by the editor who said something like, from now on we want to have the first paragraph in a particular typeface, or we want it bold instead of, Roman. And the next day the paper would come out and it would be the same as the day before. And he would go, what are you doing? I've asked you to do that. Why haven't you done it? I'd then have to go and tell the guys that I told to do it, why haven't you done it? And you can't, there's not really a nice way of doing that.
No, and if you want things to change in government, you do need the political will to push it through from the very top. And if you left civil servants to their own, I'm not going to criticise all of them because there are many good and talented civil servants, but if you left them on their own devices, I think we would find government that just stagnates, it doesn't get anything done. But when the politicians start getting involved and saying, look, I want this to happen, I want that to happen, because ultimately the people have elected us on a mandate to deliver this, that's when you see things change. And I think it's only a good thing that we've got someone like Steve, who is, a tough taskmaster, but someone who is got a track record of getting things done, that we've got him in somewhere like the Department of Health to actually shake it up a bit.
And I mean, you've worked with him, so you know him. And if you said to me, he can be a little bit brusque at times, or he can be a little bit short with people, even that doesn't amount to it. I mean, I'm not saying you have said that. I mean, you can tell me what sort of guy he is, but, there are always going to be times when somebody could be described as being a bit short with someone, aren't there?
Yeah, we all have good days, we all have bad days, but I can tell you this much, Steve Barclay is not a bully. I don't recognise those characteristics in that Guardian
He's
article.
not unpleasant.
He's not unpleasant. I mean, look, at the end of the day, he's in an important job and he's doing important work, so he isn't going to be going around cracking jokes every 5 minutes.
And he's also the guy who answers to the government and his own boss, Rishi Sunak, about what's going on in the Department of Health.
Yeah, absolutely he does. And the thing I find with this, Mike, that is extraordinary is there isn't any formal complaint against Steve Barclay. It's all just office hearsay. So, I mean, the fact that that's made the Guardian on its own, I think, is slightly bizarre, but Steve Barclay is not someone who I recognise as a bully. I mean, he's a good manager in the sense that he does actually recognise the small details. I've seen him, go to lengths to celebrate someone's birthday or to write a particular message in their leaving card or whatever it might be. He does those things that are above and beyond a good boss does, and he's certainly not a bully.
And also, the Guardian doesn't appear to have learned its lesson, because what we know from the Dominic Raab case was that an awful lot of the stories that they published about Dominic Raab turned out to be completely baseless. The one where he was throwing tomatoes around, where he was shouting, where he was throwing things, where he was, swearing at people. He himself said in his resignation letter, not one allegation of swearing was upheld, and he said, in all the time that I worked in the department, I never did swear. So all of that stuff, and they had published all that without really sourcing it, just saying it was from a source.
Well, this is what's difficult, Mike. What constitutes bullying? I mean, how on earth do you define bullying between just being someone who's got high standards or being able to, want to do a good job? And I think that's the difference here, is you've got someone who can say something and suddenly it makes the front pages of the paper, and then, perception is reality in the world of politics. So once it makes that front page or makes the news bulletin, suddenly that narrative sets in train and everyone starts thinking, oh, when he spoke to me in that way, was that bullying? Or was this bullying? And then it builds and builds and builds. So I just think that there's a big issue with how we define bullying in the workplace. And I actually think that both civil servants and ministers need to have a better set of training in place so they can say, here's how you behave, here's how you conduct yourself, and here's what to expect from a government minister.
Well, Tim Lawton said something similar, that, you know, they need to get along better, because obviously it's not in anybody's interest if the minister and the civil servant don't get on, because then it doesn't work and nothing goes on. But do they have a sort of written code as far as if you come in as a special advisor, are you handed a kind of a code of conduct and something to guide you as to what you can do and what you can't do?
Absolutely. I mean, there is a number of pieces of paperwork that you have to go through when you work in the civil service or work in any sort of position in Westminster that gives you the details of how to work. But what I don't think is necessarily being understood now, and we're not seeing it just in politics, we're seeing it in the private sector as well, the standard of which people expect to be treated is very different to how maybe, Mike, when you started your career.
Well, I didn't expect anything. I just went to work, and if I got something right, I was told that was good. And if I got something wrong, I was told it wasn't. And I didn't really expect anything.
And I think if bosses start being afraid of telling people when something's gone wrong, then we're going to be at a point where productivity in this country is already low. Productivity is already, rock bottom in the UK, and it's no wonder when you start to see the way that workplaces are being, the cultures in workplaces right now, it's becoming a real issue.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I remember one of the first jobs I had in newspapers. I was working in America, actually, and the news editor came over to me and said, we want you to go to Florida, and sort of walked off, and I was like, and I thought, how am I going to get to Florida? I didn't really have any money. I didn't have a plane ticket. And then within the next sort of half an hour, they came and gave me a plane ticket. They gave me a car voucher. They gave me some cash, and they were like, off you go. And I was like, this is great. But I mean, that's how low my expectations were. I didn't expect anything.
Well, if you think of the journey that most people have when they get into the workplace, and I went through it as well. You're at university. You literally get money in your bank account for doing nothing through student loans. So that's as given to you. And then you go into the workplace, and you've got this idea of what work should be. But it's not as glamorous. It's not what you had in mind, and you do have to do the hard work, and you have to have the graft, and sometimes you do get spoken out in a way that
might be dull,
and some of it might be dull, and it might be mundane. And I think that there has to be an understanding of people that go into the workplace, especially in government, with those types of jobs. There is a lot you've got to get through before you reach those upper levels of government.
And I work with a very small team here, so we all get along pretty well for most of the time. Anyway, I'm sure Aaron's looking at me, smiling benignly. But there are places where I've heard of where you got, say, a bigger team, and you get somebody young who comes in as an intern, and they say, well, there's the coffee machine, will you go make some coffee? And they go, oh no, don't do that. And they're sort of 19, 20 years old, still at university. They don't make tea for people because that's beneath them.
And you think that,
and you go going, sorry?
There's a lot of privilege, I think, and actually, some of those from the better universities, shall we say, that those graduates that come out, I think they've got an even elevated sense of, actually, that's beneath me, I shouldn't be doing that, I've got a degree from Oxford or Cambridge. Well, we all have to start somewhere in the workplace. It becomes an even playing field again once you get past university. So I
presume in places like the Department of Health and Social Care, there will be a hierarchy, but there will also be people who have been there such a long time and seen so many ministers come and go that they might think they own the place.
Yes, there's certainly a case of that. And actually, the more experienced heads tend to be those that do put an arm around the younger folks that are coming in and show them the ways in which things work. Because, we all know workplaces have their nuances. Different characters, different individuals like to be, treated in different ways, whatever it might be. And I think getting to understand that is vital, and that's why you need the experience of some of those older heads around to coach and nurture that young talent. And there's loads of talent in the civil service. There genuinely is lots of really good people.
Well, there's tens of thousands of people, so they can't all be rubbish. But, I mean, equally, there seems to now be, anyway, at the top, certainly for those who leak stories to The Guardian, a real kind of hatred of the Tories. And that's beginning to come through with these kinds of rumours and these kinds of stories.
Yeah, it is, and I think that's existed in the civil service for quite a while now, and now it's become fashionable to have sort of left-wing views or anti-Tory views. And if you consider a lot of people in the civil service live in London, which we know is a fairly liberal city, liberal-leaning
city. Well, it's a Labour city, isn't it?
It's a Labour city, so it's natural that there'll be people with political views. Now, that isn't an issue for me. The issue is when it starts to integrate into their work. And if you leave your politics at the door, I think you can be a fantastic civil servant. But it's a bit like, you shouldn't be able to tell what someone's political views are in the civil service, and I think that's changing to the point where you've got them speaking to newspapers like The Guardian, therefore able to deliver,
and you also know, I mean, looking at the Home Office and all the problems that the Home Office has got, not least involving the Home Office union, which is actually, I think, suing the government over its policy on immigration.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And so you go, well, hang on a minute, of course you're not going to carry out the policy if you're so against it that you're actually suing the government to stop them from doing it.
Yeah, and I think they have to get back to basics in the civil service, which is that they are not there to formulate policy, they are there to deliver policy, and it's down to the democratically elected politicians to set that manifesto, to set that policy agenda, and the civil servants are the ones that make it happen. And I just think there is now becoming a disconnect where civil servants seem to think that they can actually dictate policy or disagree with policy, when that isn't what they are there to do, that isn't what they are paid to do. And I think that's where the big issue lies at the minute.
Yeah, it is absolutely utterly bizarre, but I mean, it's not going to get any better, is it, in terms of how it's going to go between now and the next election, because they seem to have got the impression that if they could get Raab, which they kind of did, they could get anyone.
Yeah, and I think there is a real worry now. I imagine a lot of ministers are going to be thinking about their own conduct, and what we want to avoid now is a group of ministers that are effectively scared to drive through change, to drive through things that are going to make this country better, because they think that they're on the other end of a bullying allegation or that they might lose their job.
You can imagine the conversation. The minister says, I want to do this, and they go, well, we can't do it that way, and if you carry on like this, you'll end up like Dominic Raab.
Yeah, and I think that those sorts of threats hanging over any government minister's head is not good for the country at large. It's certainly not good for the government's agenda to get the economy moving again, to get our public services moving again, and I just think that's a real issue. But they have to get on. The civil servants and ministers have to get on, and I think when government works well, it's when there is a good relationship between those in the private office of a minister's department and the minister and their political agenda too. So there has to be that, otherwise I think we're going down a very, very worrying route. Slippery
slope, indeed. Leon, thank you very much indeed. Leon Emirali, their former government special advisor and former aide to Steve Barclay, who's the latest minister caught up in these ridiculous bullying allegations, which are not really allegations at all. I mean, it's almost like gossip more than it is anything else. But of course, it's made it to the front page of The Guardian, and it's their lead story, for heaven's sake. Nobody's mentioned as a source. It's all anonymous.